I wasn't looking for missing children when I opened that ledger in a Philadelphia archive basement. I was tracking architectural anomalies in Victorian-era institutional buildings. But there, in handwriting that grew shakier with each page, were 1,800 names. Ages 6 to 14, admitted between 1867 and 1873. Every single entry in the origin column said the same thing. Found, not orphaned, not abandoned, not transferred. Found, as if these children had materialized from nowhere, as if someone had discovered them already formed, already alive, waiting to be collected. The ledger stopped abruptly in December 1873, mid-page, no explanation, just blank pages after that, as if there had been nothing left to record. I photographed every page. When the archivist saw what I was looking at, she went quiet. "You're not the first," she said, "to look at that ledger, but they don't usually come back." That was 4 months ago. What I found since has kept me awake most nights. 250,000 children, across 3 continents, present in records for exactly 7 years, then simultaneously vanished from every census, every registry, every archive that should have held their names, not gradually, not individually, all at once. December 1873. As if someone had taken an eraser to their existence. This is about where they went, what was done with them, and why someone went to extraordinary lengths to make sure we would never ask. The archive in Philadelphia smelled like something older than dust, like paper that had absorbed too many secrets, cold enough that I kept my jacket on. The basement room had one window, high up, that let in gray October light that didn't quite reach the floor. I was looking for building permits. What I found was a ledger, handwritten, meticulously detailed. It listed the names of 1,847 children admitted to the Gerard Institute between 1867 and 1873. Ages ranged from 6 to 14. Each entry included date of arrival, physical description, and a column marked origin. Every single entry in that column said the same thing. Found, not orphaned, not abandoned, not transferred from other institutions. Found. As if these children had materialized from nowhere, as if someone had discovered them, already formed, already alive, waiting to be collected. I sat with that ledger for 3 hours. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sound that felt wrong in a room this old. Outside, traffic passed, car horns, the distant wail of sirens. Inside, I read names. Mary Castellane, age 9, found. Thomas Whitbrook, age 7, found. Elizabeth Morse, age 11, found. 1,800 names, same word, found. Found, found. The handwriting changed halfway through. Someone else had taken over the record keeping in 1871. Their script was shakier, less certain, as if the act of recording these children had become increasingly difficult, as if the scribe was losing faith in the words they were writing. Then I noticed something else. The ledger stopped abruptly in December 1873. Mid-page, no notation, no explanation, just blank pages after that, as if someone had closed the book and walked away, or as if there had been nothing left to record. The silence of those empty pages felt heavier than the names that had come before. Where did those children go? I photographed every page. The light was failing outside. The archivist came down to tell me they were closing in 10 minutes. Her footsteps echoed on the stairs. When she saw what I was looking at, she stopped. "You're not the first," she said quietly, "to look at that ledger. There's been but they don't usually come back. Why not?" She didn't answer, just stood there in the failing light, looking at the ledger like it was something dangerous. Then she said, "Be careful what you find. Some things stay buried for a reason." The building still stands on Gerard Avenue, though it's been converted to apartments now. The facades remain, the columns, the grand entrance that seems designed for something more ceremonial than housing troubled youth. I stood across the street for a long time before approaching. The afternoon was gray, threatened rain but didn't deliver, just hung there, heavy and waiting. The building's windows looked empty, even when I could see people moving behind them, as if the structure itself remembered being full of something else. The man who answered my knock was maybe 70. Gray hair swept back from a lined face. Careful eyes that took my measure before he spoke. He'd lived in the building for 40 years, he said. Knew its history, or thought he did. "You're not the first person to ask about the children," he said. His voice had the roughness of old cigarette smoke. We sat in his kitchen. Afternoon light through old windows that were original to the building, wavy glass that made the world outside look like it was underwater. He made coffee without asking if I wanted any. His hands were steady as he poured. The cups were old too, the kind with flowers on them that nobody makes anymore. "My grandfather worked here," he said, "back when it was still an institution. He was a groundskeeper. Maintained the property, kept the gardens, fixed things that broke. He didn't talk about it much. Not to my father. Not to me. But near the end, when he was very ill, dying really, he told me something. He paused, looked at his coffee like it held answers. He said the children left in the middle of the night, hundreds of them, marched out in lines. He watched from the groundskeeper's cottage. It was where the parking lot is now. Military trucks, men in unmarked uniforms. The children carried nothing. No bags, no belongings, no coats even. And it was December, cold. They just walked out into the dark. When was this? I asked. December 1873. 17th, he thought. Maybe the 18th, middle of the night. He said he couldn't sleep. He had insomnia his whole life, so he was awake when the trucks arrived. No headlights. Just rolled up quiet in the dark. And the children came out. Like they'd been expecting it. No crying. No confusion. Just walked out and climbed into the trucks. Did he know where they went? West. That's all he knew. The trucks went west. And when the sun came up, the building was empty. They brought in new children a year later. Different children. He could tell they were different. But the old ones, the found ones, were gone. My grandfather said it happened at other institutions too. Coordinated. All the same night. He said he'd been told never to speak of it. A man in a suit came to see him 3 days later. Government man. Told him what he'd seen. That was the word they used. Classified. In 1873. That's why he waited until he was dying. He was 93. Figured they couldn't hurt him anymore. I asked if I could see the basement. He hesitated, set his coffee cup down carefully. I don't go down there much, he said. Gives me the creeps if I'm being honest. But sure, you came all this way. The stairs descended deeper than they should, 4 levels down. Fluorescent lights flickering on motion sensors that didn't always work. The air got colder with each level, not the ordinary cold of underground spaces. Something else, something that made my breath visible. Even though it wasn't quite cold enough for that, the lowest level had rooms, small, windowless rooms with iron rings bolted to the walls. Not cells, something else. The rings were positioned at exact heights, precisely spaced, as if measuring something, testing something. The floor was concrete, poured sometime in the 1950s probably, but underneath you could feel stone, older stone. The foundation of whatever had been here before. The walls were lined with ceramic tiles in patterns that didn't match Victorian design. Geometric, mathematical, spirals and angles that hurt to look at for too long. Someone had tried to paint over them at some point. You could see the layers of paint, but the patterns bled through, persistent. What were these rooms for? I asked. They say it was for isolation, problem children, but look at the size. These rooms could hold 20 people each, and these rings, he touched one. It was rust-stained. My grandfather said they used them for something before the children, feet, some kind of process. He didn't understand it, but he heard sounds from down here in the weeks leading up to December. Humming, like machinery. But there was no machinery. The building had no electricity in 1873, gas lamps, that's all. But he heard it anyway, humming that made his teeth ache, made him nauseous if he stood too close to the doors. We stood in the cold basement, the fluorescent lights hummed, a different humming, or maybe the same one, echoing across time, waiting for someone to notice it again. You ever hear it? I asked. Sometimes, he said quietly, late at night, when the building's quiet, I hear something. Could be pipes, could be ventilation. But it sounds like what my grandfather described, humming that comes from the walls, from the stone. My wife says I'm imagining it, but I'm not. It's there. Constant, waiting. The Massachusetts Historical Society occupied a building on Boylston Street that felt like it resented the modern world pressing against it. Inside, it was dim, hushed, full of the weight of documents nobody read anymore. I'd called ahead, explained I was researching 19th century institutional child populations. They were polite but unhelpful, suggested I try the city archives. But I went anyway. The archivist who met me was named Claire, maybe 60, gray hair pulled back, tired eyes that had seen too many researchers chasing too many dead ends. But when I mentioned the Gerard Institute and the dates 1867 to 1873, something changed in her expression. Come with me, she said. She led me through the main reading room, past researchers bent over ancient documents, into a back corridor, downstairs, into a room that felt like it had been forgotten by the rest of the building. File boxes stacked on metal shelves. No windows. Air that tasted stale. You're looking for the children, she said. How did you know? Because I looked too, 20 years ago. Never published. Never told anyone. But I looked. She pulled out a box. Inside were census records from Boston, New York, Baltimore, and Philadelphia. Years 186, 8, 1874. Papers yellowed, edges brittle. All showed massive spikes in juvenile populations at reform institutions. Then sudden drops to 0. Same timeline. Same pattern. Look at this, she said, spreading out a map on a table that hadn't been cleaned in years. Red pins marked locations of institutions, 17 pins scattered across the eastern United States. I measured. Every single one of these buildings is exactly 73.4 miles from the nearest other building in the network. Across state lines, across geographical barriers, mountains, rivers, same distance. Exactly. That's impossible, I said. Yes, she smiled, but it was a sad smile. Bitter. I thought so too. Then I found this. She handed me a letter. The paper was so fragile, I was afraid to touch it. Dated December 15, 1873. Official letterhead, United States Army Corps of Engineers, addressed to the directors of all 17 institutions. The language was bureaucratic. Cold. Collection will commence midnight, December 17th. Transport prepared. Subjects to be ready for transfer. No personal effects. No witnesses. Cooperation mandatory and appreciated. Subjects. Not children. Not students. Not residents. Subjects. I tried to find out who sent this, Claire said. The signature is illegible. Just a scrawl. The Corps of Engineers has no record of any operation matching this description. I submitted FOIA requests, dozens of them. They were all denied. Every single one. On grounds of national security. In 2003, I got a letter from someone at the Department of Defense. It said my continued inquiries were noted and not recommended. That was all. Just those two words. Noted, not recommended. She was quiet for a moment. The air in the room felt heavy. I stopped asking after that. I have a family, a career. I didn't want to lose them. But I kept the files, kept them safe, and I've waited for someone else to find what I found. Because I think you need to know, those children didn't just disappear in America. I found records in Liverpool, Hamburg, Marseille. Same institutions, same timeline, same missing children. Whatever happened, it was international, coordinated across continents, and completely erased from history. She showed me more documents, letters between institution directors, coded language, references to the collection and final transport and completion of protocols, references to funding that came from sources that didn't exist in official records, references to military oversight of civilian institutions, and everywhere, gaps, pages removed, sections redacted, entire files missing from sequences that should have been complete. Someone went through these archives, Claire said, multiple times, removed anything too specific, but they missed things, small things, pieces that don't make sense individually but together. She gestured at the spread of documents. Together they tell a story someone really doesn't want told. The building on Brownlow Hill had been demolished in 1958. Nuclear protocol, the demolition orders said, special containment procedures for the rubble. But the foundation remained, buried under a municipal car park that was almost always empty. I wasn't supposed to access it, but there are ways. Archives that list old engineering surveys, maps that show what lies beneath modern construction. People who remember and are willing to talk. People who are old enough not to care about consequences anymore. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a maintenance shed that looked abandoned. Rusted lock that opened with bolt cutters I'd bought, specifically for this. The groundskeeper who told me about it had been breaking rules he'd kept for 30 years. I'm retiring next month, he'd said over the phone. Don't care anymore what they do to me. Someone should see it before they finally seal it permanently. They keep talking about filling the whole thing with concrete. Haven't done it yet, but they will. I descended alone. The tunnel mouth was brick-lined Victorian construction, but older underneath. Much older. The bricks were just a facade over stone that had been here centuries before Liverpool existed as a city. The walls showed marks, scratches, carvings, symbols that predated the Victorian era by so long they might as well have been from a different world. And names. Thousands of names. Carved small, careful, in letters that suggested young hands. Young hands with too much time and nothing to do but mark their existence on stone. Sarah. William, John, Elizabeth, Catherine, Thomas, Margaret Henry, on and on, covering the walls like a memorial to people who weren't dead, just gone. The tunnel extended east, toward where the docks had been, toward the water, toward ships that crossed the Atlantic. I followed it for 20 minutes using a flashlight that barely held back the darkness. The names continued the entire way. Some were carved deep, others barely scratched the surface. Some had dates next to them. 1867. 1868, 1869. The dates stopped in 1873. Children carved these, I'd asked the groundskeeper. Must have, he'd said. But the building was only standing for 23 years. 1867 to 1890. That's not enough time for thousands of children to carve thousands of names. Not unless he'd stopped there. afraid maybe to say what he was thinking, unless they were down here together. For a long time, before the building was even constructed, the tunnel opened into a chamber. Huge, vaulted ceiling lost in darkness above. In the center, a depression in the stone floor, circular, 15 feet across. The stone was smooth, polished by something that had moved here repeatedly. Around the circle, metal brackets were embedded in the walls. Brass maybe, tarnished green, with age. They were positioned precisely, mathematically, as if the chamber itself was some kind of instrument, some kind of device. I took measurements. The circle's diameter, 4.57 meters. The bracket spacing, 73.4 centimeters. That number again, the same spacing as the distance between institutions in America. The pattern repeating across scales. Fractal, intentional. The air in the chamber felt wrong, heavier than it should be, and there was a sound, faint, almost below the threshold of hearing. Humming. The same humming the groundskeeper's grandfather had described in Philadelphia. The same humming that came from walls that shouldn't produce sound. I stood in the center of the circle. The stone was cold under my feet, even through my boots. I closed my eyes, listened. The humming seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. From the stone, from the air, from inside my own bones. Then I heard something else. Voices, children's voices. Singing, not English, not any language I recognized. Just syllables that rose and fell like a tide. Like a calling. I opened my eyes. The chamber was empty, had been empty for a century, but the voices continued for another moment, then faded, then stopped. I left quickly, climbed back up the tunnel, past the thousands of carved names, past Sarah and William and all the others who'd marked their existence here before walking out to ships that took them west, into darkness, into whatever waited for them in Montana. The groundskeeper had told me one more thing. My gran lived near the docks, he'd said. She was young in 1873, just a girl, but she remembered. Said the children came from the ships, special ships, government ships. They arrived at night, unloaded cargo that walked. That's how she said it, cargo that walked. And then later, in December, the children went back onto ships, different ships, American ships, and sailed west. She watched from her window. Said the children walked up the gangways like they were going home. Not scared, not sad. Just going home. The institution on Norah Pier marked had been converted to a museum in 1995, not a museum of the children, a museum of maritime history. As if the building's original purpose could be overwritten by curation. As if telling a different story loudly enough could drown out the original one. The curator was reluctant to speak. Young, maybe 30, professional distance like armor. We don't discuss the children, she said when I asked. Official policy. The records are incomplete. Anything we said would be speculation. We prefer to focus on verified history. But you've looked, I said. You know. She was quiet. The museum was empty. Midweek afternoon. No tourists. Just us standing in a hall full of ship models and navigation instruments. Come back at closing time, she finally said. I returned at 6. The museum was locked. She let me in through a side door, led me through darkened exhibits to stairs that descended into the basement, where they kept materials not on display, not suitable for public viewing. File boxes. Photographs, artifacts labeled but not explained. This, she said, opening a ledger, is the admission record. 1867 to 1873. 2,300 children. All arrived within that 6-year window, all listed as transferred from state custody. But when I cross-referenced with state records, none of them existed before 1867. No birth certificates, no baptismal records, no family history, no prior residence. They appeared at age 7 or 8 or 9, fully formed, speaking German perfectly, with no documented past. She showed me photographs, group pictures of the children, rows of faces in stiff, formal poses. Something about them looked wrong, not physically wrong. Physically, they looked like normal children, but their expressions, uniform, calm, too calm for children being photographed. No squirming, no closed eyes, no awkward half smiles, just steady gazes directly into the camera, as if they were waiting, all of them, waiting for the same thing. Then in December 1873, they leave feet all at once. The records say, repeated for industrial training. But industrial training where? No destination listed, no follow-up documentation, no later census records. They vanished from every subsequent database. It's as if 2,000 children simply stopped existing, walked out of history. Did anyone witness them leaving? One person? She hesitated, looked at the photographs like they might overhear. A dock worker. His testimony is in the city archive, unofficial, never published. He said he saw them being loaded onto a ship, middle of the night. Military supervision. The children walked single file up the gangway. No crying. No resistance. No hesitation. Just walked. He said it was the silence that stayed with him. Children that quiet aren't natural. Even well-behaved children make some noise. These made none. Like they were in a trance, or like they knew exactly what was happening and had accepted it completely. She handed me a document, handwritten, dated December 18, 1873. I saw them go, 2,000 souls or more. The ship was unmarked. American maybe, or built to look American. It sailed west at dawn. The children watched from the deck as the land disappeared, watching like they were saying goodbye to something temporary. I was told to forget, paid to forget. Good money, but I won't. Someone should know they were real, that they existed, that they went somewhere, that they weren't just numbers in a ledger. The dock worker's name had been redacted. Black ink, careful, thorough. Why tell me this? I asked. Because I'm leaving, she said, taking a position in another city, another museum. I won't be responsible for these records anymore, and I'm tired of pretending they don't matter. Those children were real. They lived here, slept in rooms upstairs, ate in the dining hall, learned German and mathematics and history, and then they were taken somewhere, and nobody talks about it. Official policy, don't discuss the children, keep to verified history. But this is verified. It's documented. It just doesn't make sense, so we pretend it doesn't exist. She showed me one more thing, a diary kept by one of the institution's teachers, a woman named Hilda Brenner. She'd taught there from 1868 to 1873. Her handwriting was precise, controlled. Most entries were mundane. Lesson plans, student progress, discipline issues, normal things. But the final entry, dated December 16, 1873, was different. Tomorrow they leave. I was told this morning. No explanation. Just that they will be collected tomorrow night and relocated. The children seem to know already. They've been too quiet today, looking at everything like they're memorizing it. One girl, Anna, came to me after class. She hugged me, said thank you, said we'd taken good care of them while they waited. I asked what she meant. She just smiled, said I'd understand someday, that they'd come from somewhere else and now they were going home. I thought she was confused, but when I looked in her eyes, she wasn't confused. She knew something I didn't, something all of them knew. I don't think I'll ever see them again. I don't think anyone will. Hilda Brenner never wrote another entry. The diary ended there. The records led west, always west. Shipping manifests, train schedules, military transport logs, all pointed to Montana Territory. Specifically, to a site 30 miles north of Fort Benton. No town there now, no ruins, no historical markers, just high plains and wind and grass that went on forever. But old survey maps from the 1870s showed something called the Relocation Facility. Operational 1873. 1892. No explanation of what it relocated or why, just coordinates and a notation that it was government property restricted access. I drove out there in October, cold wind cutting across grassland that had turned golden with autumn. Empty land. No houses, no roads except the dirt track I was following. No signs of human presence except occasional fence posts marking property boundaries. Nobody seemed to care about anymore. The GPS coordinates put me in the middle of nothing. Just grass, sky, wind, no markers, no signs, but the ground showed depressions, foundations maybe, long, buried, rectangular patterns in the grass where things had been, where buildings had stood. I brought ground-penetrating radar, portable unit, the kind archaeologists use, expensive, borrowed from a contact who didn't ask what I needed it for. I set it up and started scanning. The screen showed structure, deep structure, tunnels extending 40 feet down, chambers, networks connecting them, and something else, void spaces, huge void spaces, arranged in that same pattern, 73.4 meters apart, perfect spacing, geometric, intentional, the same pattern as the institutions on the East Coast, the same pattern as the brackets in Liverpool. The pattern repeating. I started digging at one of the depressions. 2 feet down, I hit stone, worked stone, not local geology. This was brought from somewhere, or was here before any of this. Imported or incredibly ancient. The stone had marks, names carved small, child-sized letters. Sarah, William, John, Elizabeth. The same names from Liverpool. The exact same names, carved here thousands of miles from where they'd been carved before, as if the children had marked their presence in both places, as if they'd traveled from one chamber to another and needed to leave proof they'd existed in both. I sat in the dirt, wind cutting across the plains, holding a piece of stone that connected Liverpool to Montana across an ocean and a continent. The sun was setting. The grass turned red in the light, and I felt watched, not by people, by something else. By the land itself, maybe. By whatever remained of what had happened here 150 years ago. An old man found me there at sunset. Rancher from 5 miles south. He rode up on a horse that looked as old as he did. Both of them weathered. Both of them permanent fixtures of this landscape. "You're not the first to dig here," he said. His voice was rough from decades of wind. "Who else?" "Researchers. Government people. My grandfather said they came in the 50s. Brought equipment. Dug for 3 months. Had a whole camp set up. Then one day they just stopped. Filled it all back in. Concreted over, buried it deep. He said they were scared. Whatever they found, it scared them enough to bury it and leave and never come back. He helped with the filling. They paid him well, told him never to talk about it." "Did your grandfather see what they found?" "No, they wouldn't let locals near the excavation. But he heard them talking, late at night when they thought nobody was listening. Said they found rooms, hundreds of rooms, arranged in patterns, geometric patterns that didn't make architectural sense. And in the rooms," he stopped, looked away across the plains toward where the sun was bleeding into the horizon. He said they found evidence of children, not remains, not bodies, evidence, as if the children had been there and then gone somewhere else, somewhere the researchers couldn't follow, somewhere that scared them. Where? That's what scared them. They didn't know. The rooms had markings on the walls, numbers and symbols, coordinates, my grandfather thought, but not coordinates for anywhere on Earth. That's what he heard them say. Coordinates for somewhere else. And the rooms were still active. That's the word they used. Active, like they were still functioning, still doing whatever they'd been designed to do, even though they'd been buried for 80 years. The wind picked up. I looked at the carved stone in my hand, thought about children carving their names in Liverpool, then carving them again in Montana. Thought about rooms arranged in precise geometric patterns. Thought about military transports and midnight loading, and subjects not children. Thought about coordinates that pointed somewhere else. "What do you think happened to them?" I asked. The old man was quiet for a long time. The horse shifted. The sun was almost gone. "I think they went home," he finally said. "I think this was never their home. I think they were here temporarily, waiting, and when it was time, they went back to wherever they'd come from. And the rooms, I think the rooms were doors, transportation devices, whatever. I think they're still here, still functioning, still connected to wherever those children went. That's why the government sealed them, not to hide what happened, to prevent it from happening again." He rode away as the last light left the sky. I stayed until full dark, standing on ground that held chambers and tunnels and rooms that nobody was allowed to excavate. Holding a stone with names that proved children had been here, had marked their existence, had left evidence they couldn't entirely erase. The wind died as night fell, and in the silence I heard it. Faint, almost below hearing, humming, coming from the ground beneath my feet, coming from rooms 40 feet down that were still active, still functioning, still waiting for something. I left before I could talk myself into digging deeper. Back in Philadelphia, I returned to the archive. There was more. There's always more if you know how to look, where to look, what questions to ask. Claire from Boston had given me a contact, someone who'd been tracking this longer than either of us, Dr. Michael Reeves, former professor of history at Penn State. Retired in 2007 under circumstances that were never fully explained. His research into institutional child populations had been discouraged by the university administration. Funding withdrawn, access to archives restricted, subtle pressure to focus on other topics. He'd retired instead. Spent the next 17 years continuing his research privately. He lived in a small house in West Philadelphia. Cluttered, books everywhere, file boxes stacked in corners, maps covering entire walls, the accumulated evidence of 2 decades of investigation, of trying to piece together a story that someone had deliberately shattered. "You've been to Montana," he said when I read. Statement of fact. "How did you know?" "Because that's where everyone goes eventually. If they follow the pattern long enough, if they don't get scared and stop, Montana is where it ended. Or where it began, depending on how you look at it." He gestured to his maps, pins and strings connecting locations. 17 institutions in America, 23 in Europe, 4 in Russia that I've documented but can't verify, all constructed between 1865 and 1867, all using identical architectural plans, all receiving thousands of children designated as found or transferred with no prior documentation, all empty by December 1873. "Where did they come from?" I asked. "The children, originally. That's the question, isn't it?" He pulled out a folder, thick, heavy with papers. Inside were documents I'd never seen, census records from 1850, population data from cities across America and Europe, all showing anomalies. "Look at this. Philadelphia in 1850, population 408,000. By 1865, 65,000, a growth of 157,000 in 10 years. Normal immigration and birth rates would account for maybe 80,000 of that. Where did the other 77,000 come from? He showed me similar data for Boston, New York, Liverpool, Hamburg, Marseille. All showed massive unexplained population increases in the 1850s. All showed those increases concentrated in juvenile populations, ages 5. Children who appeared in records with no prior documentation, no birth certificates, no immigration records, no family history. Just present suddenly where they hadn't been before. Now look at this. He pulled out another document, newspaper clipping from 1858, Philadelphia Inquirer. Mysterious influx of youth continues. City officials baffled by hundreds of unaccompanied children appearing in streets and public spaces with no memory of origin or family. Temporary housing being arranged. Medical examinations reveal children to be healthy, well-nourished, and remarkably well-behaved, though many seem confused about their circumstances. Authorities appeal for any information regarding their origins. Similar stories from a dozen cities. All the same period. All describing children who appeared fully formed, speaking local languages, with no memory or documentation of where they'd come from. Children who seemed normal in every way except for the complete absence of any past. They tried to integrate them, Reeves said. Put them in schools, orphanages, foster families, but it didn't work. The children were wrong somehow. Not dangerous, not defective, just wrong. People couldn't articulate why. They looked like children, acted like children, but something about them made people uncomfortable. So they started concentrating them, building special institutions, the reform schools, industrial training institutes, places where the children could be together, away from the general population. And then they evacuated them, I said. In December 1873, coordinated across 3 continents, thousands of children loaded onto ships and trains and trans, all heading to Montana. And from there, he trailed off, looked at his maps, at the evidence he'd accumulated and couldn't quite articulate, at the pattern that suggested something impossible. You think they came from somewhere else, I said. Originally, I think this was a collection point. Earth was a collection point. The 1850s, something happened, some kind of catastrophe or displacement or event, somewhere else, and children ended up here, lots of them. 250,000 across America and Europe. Maybe more elsewhere we don't have records of. They lived here for 15, 20 years, grew up here, and then someone came and took them home. Why children? Because children adapt. Children survive. If you needed to preserve a population through some kind of extinction event, you'd send the children. Young enough to adapt, old enough to remember, and you'd send them somewhere they could survive. Somewhere similar enough. Until it was safe to retrieve them, I thought about the basement rooms with iron rings, about tunnels under Liverpool, about chambers in Montana arranged in precise geometric patterns, about coordinates that didn't point anywhere on Earth, about children who appeared with no past and left with no future, children who were here and then weren't, children who carved their names in stone so someone would know they existed. You think the institutions were holding facilities, I said, waiting for retrieval. I think the institutions were built on sites that were already significant. Old sites, very old. Places where the barriers between here and there were thin, and when it was time, the children were brought to those sites and sent home. Through whatever method brought them here in the first place. Why don't we remember? Because we're very good at forgetting. And because someone with considerable power made very sure we would forget. The demolitions, the redacted records, the career destructions of anyone who asked questions. This wasn't random. This was policy. Systematic, which means it mattered. Which means there was something worth hiding. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I have cancer. Stage 4, 6 months maybe. Won't see where this leads. But you're young enough. You can keep looking. Because they're still hiding it. Which means it still matters. Which means there might be evidence that remains. Something they couldn't erase. Something that persists. There are things I don't know. Things I may never know. Who organized the coordinated evacuation of 250,000 children across 3 continents in December 1873? What infrastructure existed to move that many people in 3 days? Where did the children originally come from in the 1850s? Why did they appear with no memory, no documentation, no trace of origin? What were the basement chambers for? The iron rings? The ceramic tiles with mathematical patterns? Were they containment? Preparation? Communication devices? Transportation systems? Why Montana? What made that specific location the terminus point? What existed there before the relocation facility was built? Why build there and not somewhere else? What does transferred mean in a military report? Transferred where? How? By what method? Through what kind of technology or system? Who maintains surveillance on the 17 American sites and why? What are they watching for? What do they expect to see? What would they do if it happened again? And most importantly, were all 253,847 children successfully retrieved? Or are some still here somehow, somewhere, waiting in the spaces between our reality and theirs? The buildings are mostly gone now, demolished with nuclear protocol, filled with concrete, converted to apartments or museums or parking lots. The records are scattered, redacted, classified, or destroyed. The witnesses are dead or silent. The researchers who asked questions had their careers destroyed or learned to stop asking. But evidence persists, names carved in stone under Liverpool. Foundations in Montana that ground-penetrating radar shows extend down 40 feet into chambers we're not allowed to excavate. Photographs of children with expressions that suggest they knew something we don't. Ledgers that end mid-page in December 1873. Military reports that speak of transfers and terminations and retrieval protocols. Census anomalies that show children appearing and disappearing like they were never fully here. And 17 sites across America where someone still watches. I think about those children. 250,000 souls. Children who appeared from somewhere else, lived among us for 20 years, and then returned home, or were taken, or chose to leave. Children who carved their names in stone so someone would know they existed, so someone would remember. Children who waited patiently in institutions designed to hold them until retrieval was possible. We forgot anyway. History closed over them like water. We built our understanding of the 19th century without them. We told ourselves stories about westward expansion and industrial growth and immigration patterns that fit the narrative we wanted. We ignored the gaps in records, the unexplained population spikes, the institutions that appeared and emptied and disappeared. We pretended 250,000 children vanishing simultaneously was normal, or didn't happen, or didn't matter. But the stone remembers. The tunnels remember. The coordinates arranged in geometric precision remember. And somewhere, maybe, the children remember too. I still visit the sites sometimes. Stand on ground that used to hold buildings, that used to hold thousands of children who came from nowhere and returned to nowhere. I put my hand on walls that are original. Close my eyes. Listen. Sometimes I think I hear it. That high-pitched frequency. Constant. Waiting. Like a signal that was never turned off. Like children who were promised someone would come back for them. Like a call that's still being sent. Across whatever distance separates their world from ours. The stairs still descend. 4 levels down. Into stone that predates Victorian architecture by centuries. Into rooms with rings and patterns and purposes we've forgotten. And the stone is cold. Patient. Holding frequencies we can measure, but not explain. Holding names we should remember but don't. The children existed. They were real. They came from somewhere. They lived here. Breathed our air. Walked our streets. Carved their names into our stone. And then they went somewhere else. Somewhere we can't follow. Somewhere that scared researchers enough to bury it and forget. And someone has spent 150 years making absolutely certain we would never ask where. But you can still find them if you know where to look. In carved names and geometric patterns. In classified documents and demolished buildings. In the silence of researchers who asked questions and were told not to ask again. In census records that don't quite add up. In population spikes that have no explanation. In institutions that appeared suddenly and emptied mysteriously and left foundations that still hum in the dark. They existed. They were here. And perhaps, in ways we don't understand, in places we don't recognize, in frequencies our ears can almost but not quite perceive, they're still here, still waiting, still hoping someone will remember to come back. The stone is patient, and so, perhaps, are they.